There are two simple techniques that can dramatically improve every single hip opener that you practice and you teach. Even better, these techniques are incredibly simple to incorporate and they're often overlooked. The first thing is to change the angle at which we are doing the forward bend. That usually incorporates either rotating the torso, bringing a little bit of twist to the pose, or just forward folding at a slightly different angle relative to the hip. The second thing is to change the muscular tone of the muscle that we're stretching by adding a little bit of engagement. For me personally, when I'm practicing, I use these techniques all the time. When I'm teaching students and when I'm training teachers, these are the techniques that I'm drawing on everything from simple cross-legged forward bends to pigeon pose to gomukhasana and beyond. In order to help you support and teach your students, I want to break these concepts and these techniques down a little bit further. I want to explain to you how they work, and I want to show you how and where I incorporate these techniques into my sequences. In fact, before we begin, let's get a feel for this together. This is so simple, everybody, and you can feel it right away as you're sitting and watching this. Let's take a leg. Let's take the right outer ankle on top of the left knee. Now, as we do this, everybody, first thing I want us to do is just take a nice, simple little forward bend, typically as we would conventionally do it. We hinge at the hips, we bring the chest forward as if we're gonna take our breastbone up, over, and beyond the front shin. And as we do this, you likely get a good and effective stretch in the outer hip. Shift back. But now I want us to play with the angle first. So instead of coming forward at that same angle that we do time and time again, I want you first to shift forward, and then I want you to turn your chest towards the right knee. Like you're adding a little bit of a twist to the pose. Then once you've turned the torso a little bit towards the right knee, take the left arm, scoop underneath the right knee and hug it towards your chest. Now hold it there. And as you pull that knee a little bit up towards the hand, create a brace with the hand. And now with the knee, press firmly into the hand. Keep this. So continue to turn the chest a little bit further to the right. So instead of folding forward over the front shin, you're folding forward over the knee. And instead of those outer hip muscles being passive, they're engaging by pressing against the arm. Stay there for another breath and feel that difference. Good. Slowly come up. Now, let's break that down a little bit further. My name is Jason Crandall. I've been a globally respected and influential yoga teacher for nearly 30 years, teaching at the world's most prestigious conferences and studios. I've created the most comprehensive and reputable online teacher training resources to help you learn more and truly feel comfortable and enjoy the experience of being a yoga teacher. The first thing to do, pick any hip opener that you want to focus on. It can be pigeon, simple cross-legged forward bend, ankle to knee pose. Could even be a reclined ankle to knee pose. Most of the time when we do these poses, we come forward with our torso at the exact same angle. Now this isn't bad, but anyone that's done any weight training or any endurance sports in their life knows how common it is to hit a plateau when you do the same thing, the same way, with the same weight and the same duration and the same repetitions every time. In everybody, the same thing happens in our openers and in our yoga practice. If we're not diversifying tension and angle, we're gonna hit diminishing returns. So instead of just taking pigeon pose, for example, that's what we'll start with. Instead of just taking pigeon pose and doing a simple forward bend, what we want to do is we want to take pigeon pose and we want to vary the angle at which our torso is coming forward. We can do this a couple of different ways. The first way I like to do this, everybody, so right now my left leg is leading. If you want to do this pose with me, jump into it. Otherwise, practice another time. So I have my left leg forward here in pigeon pose, as you can see. Now, as I come forward, I take a few moments where my torso's at that more conventional angle. Then I'm gonna diversify the angle two different ways. I'm gonna base on my right forearm. I'm gonna walk my left hand a little bit out to the left, and I'm gonna add the tiniest little bit of a twist. Now, this twist is not primarily for my spine, although I might feel a nice simple little stretch in my back. But when I add this simple twist, you see I'm basing on my right arm, I'm lifting and turning my chest to the left. As I do that, that's gonna put a different degree of tension into those left outer hip muscles that I'm stretching. Another way that we can do this, everybody, you're gonna see me walk the other direction. So now, instead of turning to the left, I'm gonna walk towards my front foot. And as I do this, everybody, I'm not adding any twist whatsoever. I'm actually just forward bending with my torso at a slightly different angle relative to my front leg. So I'm not changing the position of my front leg in pigeon, although I could, but instead of coming forward over the front shin, I'm coming forward over the foot. Now, as I come forward over the foot, I'm still stretching the same muscles. I'm still stretching my external rotators, my glutes, and my abductors, but I'm doing so at a completely different, unique, and novel angle. Let's look at another pose this works great in, though honestly, like I said, this works really great in all the hip openers. So what we're gonna do here is ankle to knee pose, or fire log, or Agni Stambhasana. This pose has a ridiculous amount of names. So what I'm gonna do here is, instead of just coming straight forward, I'm gonna rotate my torso just like I did in pigeon, and I'm gonna add a little simple twist to the forward bend, not for my back, but to put a different stress on my left outer hip muscles. Now again, just like I did in pigeon, instead of just coming forward over the front shin, I'm also going to play a little bit different angle. I'm gonna rotate my torso to the right, which is towards my front foot, and I'm gonna fold forward over that leg. Now, when you try this, you are gonna experience that there's going to be likely a significant increase in demand. There's gonna be an increase in demand for two reasons. Number one, it's a novel angle. We just haven't adapted to this angle as much, so it's new, it's fresh. The other thing, when we are forward folding away from the front leg, when we're changing this angle, we're putting those outer hip muscles under greater tension. The second technique that we can incorporate literally in every single hip opener and pretty much every yoga pose you do is to engage the muscles that are stretching just a little bit in their end range. So here's what this means. When you stretch a muscle, instead of keeping the muscles that are being stretched passive, you're going to engage them slightly. Now, in order to do this, everybody, we can simply, in a pose like pigeon, use the ground. So once again, I have my left leg forward in pigeon. Now, this isn't quite as visual, but when I'm in pigeon and I rest my forearms down, instead of my body being limp, instead of my body being passive and dead weight, I'm gonna take the front shin and I'm gonna press it firmly into the ground. And again, this isn't something that's easy to convey visually, so just trust that I'm changing the tone of the pose. So in pigeon, I am pressing my front shin down, and I'm also creating the action of slightly dragging the yoga mat with my front leg towards my hip. It's almost like my front leg is reaching out, pressing down, and pulling the yoga mat towards me. Everybody, when you root down and you engage into the floor, you have now converted a passive stretch into an end range engagement. So what this is going to provide for you and your students is the same flexibility that a passive stretch would produce, right? It's not like you're gonna have less flexibility, but it's going to give you more feedback, more control, more strength. The other thing that this technique is typically going to do, it's going to require you to pay a little bit more attention. And ultimately, yoga is about our engagement with mind in doing what we're doing. So the yoga practice, of course, isn't just the mechanical actions of the body, it's the quality of mental attentiveness moment to moment. When we're in something like a cross-legged forward bend, or as I'm showing here, ankle to knee, if the leg that you're stretching is not in contact with the ground, you have to build the base for it. You have to give it something to resist into. So watch what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna come forward into this pose, and then I'm gonna take my forearm underneath it, and I'm gonna gently scoop and support that leg. I'm gonna hug it into my chest or towards my chest. Now, as I pull it in just a little bit, I'm gonna hold and brace it there. Now that arm just becomes a stable resource to press my leg gently into. So now as I press my leg into that support arm, I'm engaging the muscles that I'm stretching while I'm stretching them. So I'm co-developing the flexibility, but also the strength, the control, and that attention to focus and detail. Part of the beautiful thing about these techniques is that they can be done separate or together. And when we do this, everybody, we're not in any way throwing the conventional way of doing these poses under the bus. We can come forward and keep that same more consistent conventional angle and that more passive approach to these stretches, but we can also diversify how we're doing these poses by changing tone, by changing the angle. So now everybody, what do we have? We have more options. And that's ideally what an education should provide us. And this is what I strive for in every training I teach. It's to give us more options, to give us more context, to help us understand that there are more ways of doing postures and there are more techniques to utilize than sometimes we're exposed to. In terms of use cases, when do we use these techniques, especially the technique of end range engagement? To me, it really comes down to environments, okay? So if I'm teaching and practicing more dynamically, if I'm teaching a stronger vinyasa flow, if we're moving, if we're working, if the body's warm, I'm pretty much gonna default to these end range engagement techniques every single time. If it's a more dynamic practice, then the techniques that I'm gonna apply are gonna be more dynamic. With regards to changing angles, usually everybody, I do it every time I teach one of these poses. Instead of just teaching pigeon pose or gomukhasana or fire log or simple cross legs, I'll usually in that sequence teach those same poses a couple times, or I'll have different phases of the pose. And if I teach the same pose a couple times, each time we do it, I'm gonna come through and do it at a slightly different angle. So we're diversifying those stresses and we're keeping our mind's presence. Now, second context, it's a hatha class, or it's a yin class, or it's a restorative class. Or for me personally, a lot of the times that I will practice is in the evening. So I might have worked out that day, I might have trained jujitsu that day, I might just be tired or stressed or overwhelmed, and I don't want to work. I don't want things to be different. I don't want to have to honestly think that much more. I just want something known and comforting, and I'm gonna come back to what feels like the pair of sweatpants that I've worn 1,000 times. So everybody, when I'm giving you these techniques, remember, they're not mutually exclusive. They're, like I said earlier, they're to expand your possibilities, and the best thing that you can do is to get out there and play with them. Everybody, I've taught yoga for a long time, so I know as well as anybody, we need community, we need ongoing connection, we need ongoing education, we need ongoing inspiration. Actually, one of the things I didn't understand about being a yoga teacher is how kind of weirdly lonely it is professionally, right? Like we just oftentimes, we don't have peers, and our teachers are just sometimes not always as connected to us as sometimes we want. So I'm hopeful that content like this is gonna continue to feed you and inspire you and support you. If so, please subscribe, please like, all those things. It's genuinely helpful. And if you want to learn even more and go deeper, the courses, the 300-hour training that I have is super amazing. Check all that information out in the bio and play with this stuff. Let me know how it goes for you. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy your practice.